A Thing in the Woods. Chapter 18. There's a story that goes along with that painting. M- told me that the story was written by hand on the back of the picture, and while he couldn't take the painting out of its frame in order to show it to me, he could pass on the story from memory. With a morbid grin on his face, M- told me the story that follows. The town of Huxley has a long history of mysteries surrounding children. Long before the kids who were discovered in the mud, though some might say that the two are connected, there was the story of the whispers in the night. The story says that a young boy and his sister were on their way home one winter day when they decided to take a shortcut through the woods by the river. As they walked, the girl dropped her basket, and apples scattered across the frozen ground. The children stopped to pick up the apples, and as they did so, the girl let out a scream and pointed to the ground. There, still half buried in the ice along the riverbank, was the body of an old woman. The discovery created quite an uproar in the small town of Huxley. Some claimed that the woman was merely a stranger who had slipped and drowned along her way. Still, others insisted that the body was that of Eliza Paxton, a lunatic woman who had disappeared without a trace nearly 40 years prior. While gossip stirred and the townsfolk told stories amongst themselves with morbid delight, the young boy and girl who had discovered the body were tormented by their discovery. They heard raspy voices taunting them in the night and the sound of an old woman laughing in the distance. Though the children insisted that they could hear these things, their parents heard nothing. They watched helplessly as their children were driven mad by the phantoms. Then one night, as their exhausted parents slept, the children chased those voices into the darkness and were never heard from again. M- told me this story as though we were sitting around a campfire, and as though he had rehearsed and delivered the same story 100 times before. Then he said, "Though most people in this town have never heard the story of those children, those of us who know the history of this land believe that the bodies discovered only a few years ago are the bodies of that boy and his sister." Then he winked and told me to make sure that I gave him credit in any book that I might write about my story in the future. Apparently, his name is Marius Dashel. I jotted down notes from his story as he told me and took a picture of the painting on the wall. Then, as I started to walk out the door, Marius called out, "Hey!" I stopped and turned around. With a straight face, he asked me, "Did you ever hear whispers?" And without betraying any emotion at all, I whispered to him, "I still do." Then I walked out of the library. I went back to my car and got inside, trying to decide where to go next. I don't know what piece of information I want to uncover or what closure I'm hoping to find at this point. Now I have this old legend stuck in my head. I don't know how legitimate that story is. The source of the story wasn't the most trustworthy after all. However, sitting in my car, staring at the picture I took of that old painting, my eyes are drawn to the figure in the woods. Seeing it there, lurking in the trees, brings me back to my last night in Huxley. The night I broke.
This is the voice of the embers, where stories burn.